high pressure thing I have to do. That's what she did. I don't want to like kick the wire.
You here.
Good morning.
I was at
I didn't do it.
for businesses and business organizations.
Yeah, let's,
This is
Go back on
the
the-
ordinance.
well, it doesn't,
No,
when does it take like that?
I can put that 6 months. Get that one over there.
Okay, and when is that?
I'm
Okay.
going to double check.
Someone comes in and wants to
Folks
speak to him.
started to be informed.
Yeah, totally, yeah.
This is supposed to be.
Well, should this, maybe, so for the single stall bathroom,
I forgot. I was
Yeah.
at home last night.
how, was that health department?
Stall, single.
Well, like if you're single stall.
Bathroom bill.
Right,
Yeah.
if the single stall is supposed to be like not labeled as menstrual,
Right.
All gender.
all gender, yeah. So is,
On this?
I'm trying to remember now,
I
is that
think-
gonna be done through like restaurant inspection or?
Yeah, so it was be done through like fire inspection, health inspection.
But how are we informing our
Yeah.
organizations and businesses?
So we can definitely do it through our restaurant listserv, which covers all of the restaurants, but
Yeah.
retail businesses,
And the question
Most of
also,
them don't have bathrooms though.
no.
Some
like
of them do.
Starbucks does. and-
Yeah, that's a restaurant.
Restaurant, that'd be a restaurant.
But also the library, that it came from the library,
Yeah.
because they haven't heard anything of it, and they have single stall bathrooms that.
Where else? Oh, well, we have to cover a
Well,
lot.
I can put it out with I'm part of this ED forum, the executive director forum, that has like most of the nonprofits there.
Yeah, because outside the restaurants, one other way to get to the businesses, I mean, we do a big thing on the website about what they need to know, like,
Should we have literature or not literature, but
Well, I mean, I feel like how often are those inspections?
restaurants, quality, very.
Yeah, so if that can just be
Well,
part of
guess what?
the.
Two companies came and said.
We also sent out flyers
"Reviews,
for
I'd like us to put in."
Yeah.
Yeah, send out a flyer with that as
Okay.
well.
Do you need anything from CRC, maybe information?
Any information that they want,
Yeah, I didn't
distribute
read
it
the
up after
first
the,
guy.
included.
I didn't read the
Okay.
So I can reach out to you guys
Okay,
afterwards.
yeah.
but also it would be helpful some samples. We left it up to them.
For signage.
Yes. Sample.
Sure. Yeah, I know really the university has some very sample signage they were.
Yeah, and people can be creative too, that's the thing, it's like, I think the sample can be like, whatever you wanna do is
Okay.
fine, as long
You
as
can't go there.
it's, because some of them want something that's attractive and thematic.
Yeah.
Okay.
And some of them, they'll include everybody, including an alien. And I said, you know, this is for anybody, just, just doesn't matter who. Yeah.
Or it could just be like, look back, you know,
WC.
whatever, all right. Okay, I think we're, we can get back on track here. I'm gonna turn this on. Okay.
With the red dot on?
Yes, and it says 6 seconds now. All right, so welcome everybody. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is a special meeting of the Princeton Council, October 30th, 2019, to talk about budget priorities with some of our department heads. Madam Clerk, have we met all the members of the
Yes, ma'am.
meeting? And please call the roll.
Ms. Niedergang?
Here.
Mr. Cohen?
Here.
Ms. Miller? Here. Mr. Quinn?
Here.
Ms. Fraga?
Here.
Mr. Williamson?
Here.
Mayor Lambert?
Here, and now please join me for the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
There's here, I'd like to open up the meeting if there's anybody from the public who'd like to speak. Seeing no one, I'll close public comment. And before we get into the meat of the meeting, just wanted to explain what the purpose of this is. So each year when council sets its priorities, we look at that process and we try to figure out how we can do it better for the next year. And there seemed to be, we could do a better job with sort of solving any sort of disconnect between staff and when departments are putting together their budgets and their priorities versus council putting together a whole new layer of priorities. So these meetings are really to help inform, both to help inform council of what's going on and what the big projects are that should be on our radar. And then also if there's internal questions where it would be helpful to get council feedback and direction, that part of the discussions are to help. So recreation is up first, and turn it over to Evan Moorhead, who's subbing in for Ben Stentz.
You noticed? Yeah, I'm not bad.
Yes.
So I know Ben and I put together a sort of project list here that you guys, that should be in the packet there. This is sort of an overall kind of look at our priorities, and some of which are budget related, that are in there, and goals and the project's issues. For us, the priority continues to be just providing the outstanding service to the tens of thousands of users that we come across, either through our programs, the 100,000+ people that come through the pool every summer, and then obviously the parks, which take up a huge amount of time for our maintenance staff in terms of the upkeep and the sports groups and the informal use that takes place there in the park. So that continues to be our highest priority. Now that being said, we have several projects that are on our horizon, a couple in the short term that we're working on, one of which is the Maggie's Playground project, which I'm happy to say is moving forward now fairly. I think we can move forward on that in the next few months. We already have some money in place for that. What I don't know is there's going to need to be a second phase to that with the swing sets that aren't currently being addressed as part of this initial phase. And so, we sort of concentrate on the playground itself, just on the swings were separate elements of that. So that's one project that's out there in the short term, and that we're moving forward on, but may need some additional funding depending on what's involved with the placement of the swing sets. Obviously, the biggest one out there is Community Park South, which I think is on everybody's radar. Right now, we had a survey done this past year, survey work that was done, engineering has those results. We received that survey, and the next step of that would be a master planning process, which I think we would hope could be done sometime in 2000. There would need to be an RFP to go out for that. But that's Community Park South being the biggest park in our inventory, the most centrally located park, the most walkable park that we have in Princeton, and also probably the park that's gotten the least amount of attention in recent years. That's really, as far as projects go, that continues to be, just at the top of our list in terms of just priority. And also, we are also moving forward with the Hilltop project through the Mercer Play Grant, which we received $500,000 from the county. The municipalities matched that. Now the price tag for what we're proposing to do is going to come in over $1 million, and the council has already approved. They're moving forward with that project. And so the RFPs in engineering's hands right now. They're hoping to have that out soon. So that's going to be a big one for us. The timeline is TBD at this point. We don't know where that's going to fall in terms of timing, closing that field down, being able to go up bid, and ultimately start that project. So those are three pretty big projects that are moving on the horizon for entering 2020. And for us, it's just so beyond the projects, it's just the issues of we've not always enough hours in a day for all the parks and the maintenance that we're trying to do with our staff. We've got 7 full-time maintenance guys. Our office staff is putting in a lot of extra hours and trying to just keep up with the demand and the workload. We got a high demand from our sports groups, high demand from the residents. Our meeting, we had a meeting at our Recreation Commission in early October to discuss Maggie's Playground, and a bunch of residents showed up to talk about Quarry Park and how they wanted to see something done, not just for the playground but with the park itself. And so it's just things like that where we've got parks that are older and aging, and that our maintenance staff is doing what they can, but we inherited those parks in 2013 in consolidation, and many of them are aging, and we're sort of in a triage mode all the time. We're just trying to do what we can to keep everything, up and running and presentable. But there's some, just some areas there where, as far as manpower goes, we'd like to be able to expand that, but there's bandwidth issues.
Can I ask, in terms of the overtime hours that you're listing in here, does that break down more with the maintenance workers or more with the office workers, or?
That's office workers primarily. Maintenance workers are overtime eligible, so when they work overtime, they do get paid. These are from the non-overtime eligible, so there's office staff, myself, Ben, 2 program people, and then our maintenance department is not overtime eligible, so those are 5. The rest of our maintenance staff, when they do work overtime, whether it's clearing snow in the winter, Saturday mornings coming to do ball field work, they are paid overtime. They're overtime hours.
For the office staff, is it more managerial types, or?
It's both. It's program and managerial. It's workload related and it's program related. So our 2 program people in particular are coming in. Summertime is heavy, very heavy for us. They're coming in 7:30 in the morning, get ready for camps, sometimes staying until 6 o'clock. Evening programs. We run Saturday morning basketball league in the winter at the university, at the Dillon Gym. We do special needs dances. One month. One night a month, so that takes up somebody's time to be there from 5:30 to 9:30 on Friday night. So it's a split between managerial coming in and manage that workload, and then folks that are actually on hand, hands-on with programs, and then coming in things like the pool. They jump on the pool all through again, weekends all through the summertime.
Conspicuous in its absence here is the dog park. So, and first, let's step back for a second and say that the signage on Maggie's Playground is very helpful to people. So I commend the department for that. I know it was a heated situation with people in the neighborhood who couldn't understand why something that appeared to be usable was not being used, and I think that the signage was immensely helpful. I've witnessed people reading it and saying, oh, that makes sense, which is the goal for a sign. So what about the dogs?
Well, so first, the dog park is something that's coming along independent, I think, of the recreation department right now, in the sense that there's a separate committee working on it. The dog park has never been a stated priority of the Recreation Commission, which is why the staff hasn't elevated it to the level of being on here. That's not to say that we're either for or against the dog park. We just aren't working on it right now, because my understanding is that the subcommittee has been spending their time at whatever the correct moment is where there needs to be a crossover to connect with the Recreation Department. That will happen. Ben and I have certainly previously looked at different locations in town and kind of put together like a list of what could be feasible in certain locations, what places to look at, what places have parking, what places are centrally located, and just kind of run through a master list of potential sites. But beyond that, it's really, I believe, in the hands of the subcommittee at this point.
Great. Thank you, Joe.
I had a few questions. I just wanted to echo Tim's thank you for the Maggie's Playground and being flexible and it's a tight spot, and there's, I think, to have a solution that preserves a lot of the trees was really important, even though it makes it more difficult to be able to pick exactly what you want out of the catalog. So really thank you for being flexible with that. For the swings, there's been some talk about whether the town has accessible swings, and I don't know if that's part of the thinking for the new swings that are going to go in there, if you might try to address that need in that spot, or if there's other spots in town where we might be able to do that.
And when you say accessible, you mean something like a supportive,
I think so, yeah.
We just have started to open that conversation back up to talk to the playground company, so I can certainly pick their brain about what they have in their inventory. We could even, maybe depending on where the price tag lies, there is money, going to be money left over from what was budgeted versus what we're going to spend just on the playground. So it could be feasible potentially, depending on how quickly we could move, to do it sort of in concert with what's going on with the playgrounds. The issue with the current swings is we had to close those down at the request of our insurance inspector. At the same time we did the playground, he told us that we needed to close those. And we can't simply replace them where they sit because the slope of that path going up into the park is not ADA compliant, so we need to relocate those swings to another spot within the park where it's much more accessible in terms of the entry to that area. And so there is a nice flat area, I think right outside of the playground there, kind of to the left, and then an open space area. So that's initially what we're looking at would be that area there, but I haven't brought up the subject of putting out that type of a swing, but we certainly do that. It's to see what they have, what it would mean in terms of cost, what it would mean. I think what we know about swings is they can't, so if you have the little toddler swings on one bay, you can't mix and match. You can't have one older swing and one toddler swing. So I think it would need to be its own bay, if you will. And we just have to make sure we would have the space. And if we do that, if we're maybe eliminating like the older swings or the younger swings, we don't want to leave anybody out because right now, prior to closing, we did have both sets, the older and the younger swings. And so that could potentially be adding a third kind of those things in there. So we just, from a space standpoint, we can make sure that we do that to fit all that in.
And then, I guess the other question I had is, the other thing that's not on here is sort of open space issues, and I think just structurally with the municipality, I'm sorry to put you on the spot for this stuff too, but it's, I think there's a question of like where that open space should lie. Should it be under the rec department? Should it be under, along with the arborist and public works? And it's like, it sounds like you guys are pretty stretched with your bandwidth, and I think the concern is that if we think of it as parks and rec, and your focus is just on the rec, but you have parks in your name and it's preventing someone else from doing it. So I guess it's, and this might be part of a longer conversation, but do you see that as like something you guys are thinking about and a central part of your planning, or should we be thinking about, should parks reside somewhere else?
Well, I think there's a couple of answers to that. We all know that the town we haven't had an open space manager, I guess in a couple of years at this point, so that the recreation does do park stuff, but we're doing the athletic field park stuff, we're doing the playgrounds, trash removal, mowing. So there's a lot of park stuff that we're doing, but as it relates primarily to like trail maintenance or some open space stuff, no, we don't have the bandwidth to concentrate on that. I mean, we're tied up with those other things. So there's not really any planning on our end that goes into it. And in fact, by description, right, I mean, it doesn't necessarily fall under I don't know that it falls under our purview either. We do get questions about it. I know others in the municipality also get questions, and we all try, I think, as best we can to come up with the answer when, we put our heads together when it relates to open space. So I don't know that taking parks, we're called the recreation department, but we're de facto parks as it relates to the ball fields and some of the other stuff I mentioned. But just as it relates to open space, we don't plan for that. We don't really have the bandwidth to concentrate and work on that right now. So where the answer lies, I don't know. I think if we were to become a true Parks and Rec department, there would need to be an additional position or so in charge of overseeing that, along with some, whether that falls under recreation or whether that ultimately falls under and all the rest of it. I think there would obviously be additional manpower to go along with that. Makes sense.
Mayor, if I may, I would think that's something that, there's a question that maybe should be asked at maybe at the governing body level and with the administrator.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking that because it may include different departments, it's probably something more, maybe we can create a committee or something to look at that. Because I know a lot of folks have been talking about getting an open space manager. We can bring in Parks and Recreation, maybe Public Works, some of our outside citizens organizations that are kind of being de facto open space managers for particular places. And because it's going to be an issue of, are we going to hire more people? Are we willing to put out more public funds to pay them? Or are we going to rely somewhat on volunteers? So that's maybe something that we can create a committee to look at.
I guess another party that should be in the mix is the county, because while we don't have any county parks right now, there have been a lot of discussions about the services that we get from the county and whether they could be doing more for us. I think there's an extensive county park system, so we want to include that in that discussion.
Just one more question. A member of the public came into one of our council meetings and was asking about bathrooms staying open during winter. He said he spoke to someone before, I'm not sure who he spoke to about it, and he was complaining that no one got back to him about it. I just want to see if I know it's sort of a curveball,
I think there was an issue about both porta-johns and bathrooms. And
porta johns, that's
and
right.
the question
I should say
about-
facilities being available.
Yeah, I think there's a different answer for the two.
And
Types can freeze in a bathroom.
and you can answer this, but it is a bigger problem, and it's a problem of really trying to maintain those through the whole period throughout the year. And I don't know if you get some.
Well, the restrooms we have to close, they have to be winterized or else the pipes would freeze. They're not, those restrooms, they don't heat those buildings, so those pipes will freeze, and so they're a much bigger problem on hand. So with those, all the restroom facilities, buildings are closed down, usually right around, maybe a little bit before Thanksgiving, so it depends on the weather, usually this time of year. We try to leave them open until the youth sports groups are done with their seasons, and then rush and close them, but if we get an early freeze, then it kind of, puts a monkey wrench into that plan. So as far as the park restrooms go, that's why those are not open. The porta potties, we do actually bring porta potties to a couple of the parks that are used most heavily in the winter, which would be Community Park North. We bring a porta potty to that location, as well as to Hilltop for the skate park, because that's open year round. And normally Turning Basin would have one. Obviously, we're taking them out of Turning Basin as of next week because of the Alexander Road project. But that aside, we would normally have one there. So those three are the most heavily used. All of our athletic fields are closed in the winter. Those parks don't get a lot of use, so it really would be a waste of money to keep. And porta potties aren't cheap. If anybody's ever seen the bill for porta potties come across their desk, I mean, we spend a lot of money on porta potties, so we're just trying to save a couple of dollars and not just have them sit in the parks all winter long. Maybe we might be passing through. We do take. There's a couple parks where we end up taking them out in the winter just because those parks don't get a lot of use. Community Park South being one because there's no restroom facility there. Obviously that comes out around Thanksgiving time, and also Marquand, we keep on in the parking lot there. But we take that out also in the winter because it's difficult if you get snow and ice if you've got a plow in there. There's a porta potty sitting in there. It's just as hard for our guys in the room. So we do have 3 porta potties year round normally. This year we're trying to just have 2. But, so there are some options for folks.
Maybe we should include those on the bike map, since the question came from someone regarding cycling. We're always looking for available facilities for what's called in the trade nature stops.
So I just have a couple of questions too. One, to echo Mr. Quinn's point about the dog park, that I think going forward we'll want to sit down with the department and get more input on locations and other expertise that you can bring to the table for us. And then I wanted to have you go through the Community Park South process a little bit more. And then the other thing is I'm interested in what kind of data, if any, you have about like who's using rec facilities and how many people use the fields year-round. Is it, do you have any information on like division between like boys and girls teams or anything like that?
So the CP South project, so the first phase of that, which was the survey work, was done this past year, and we do have the results of that survey. That, with my understanding, via engineering, was what needed to happen first before that survey would be useful to whoever does the master planning, which is the next step, where we hire a design firm to look at the entirety of that property and help us imagine what can be there in terms of athletic fields, in terms of amenities, facilities.
That would, I'm sorry to interrupt, that would take into account like climate change considerations, because I know like parts of the area, if I'm not misunderstanding, tend to be very wet, and that's not wet, or is it right?
There's some areas of the park, particularly where the park backs up to the homes on Birch Avenue, where there's a drop, there's runoff because the homes on Birch are elevated, and there's a lot of runoff there. So we have had in the past few years had some drainage work done over there just to account for that groundwater, and it seems to have improved. As far as the climate change, that I can't really, can't really speak to the involvement, how that will be factored in. But the project itself we would certainly take into account all the different stakeholder groups, whether it be different users of the sports groups, the youth groups, the dog folks that are interested in the dog park. I mean, all that I think could be factored in at that point in time. To really imagine what could be there, Community Park South, and then ultimately there will be some design options put forward, and it would be up to the folks here to kind of decide where we want to go with that. Put a price tag to it, and go from there and see what it's ultimately going to be. And it's not going to be. I think we all know this is going to be an expensive project. It's not going to be. This isn't a $1 million to $2 million project. This is a multi-million-dollar project, and ultimately all is said and done. So we need to keep pushing it along and working on it, because it's something that we're in great need of additional athletic facilities that are usable. Like I mentioned before, the park it should be the flagship of our park system, but it's not, and we need it to be. We get a lot of complaints and demand from our, we hear it a lot from the sports groups. The Hilltop project is definitely going to help, and that's going to be a great piece to have a turf field. There's no mistake in that. But it's not adding an additional field space. And CP South is generally underutilized for what it should be because of the conditions of that location.
One thing I can just kind of add, part of what we're doing in terms of financing, because it is going to be a big price tag, is kind of phasing it in. And the first part of it, like you're saying, is let's just figure out what the possibilities are. And that's what we kind of budgeted. First, do the survey, next you do the planning, and then the planning is going to be opened up to whatever we can imagine. And then we'll probably be looking to phase that in over time, based on whatever decisions we make, so that we can plan for it.
And just a question about like data on users.
Right. So with the users, we do maybe about once a year reach out to the youth sports groups, Little League, girls lacrosse, different soccer groups, and just ask them for some data. Typically, we ask them stuff as it relates to the overall number of their numbers in their particular group, as well as specifically how many of those are Princeton residents versus non-residents. We don't usually ask it based on gender. Now, some of the groups, it's obvious that the girls across.
Right.
Little League is primarily boys, although there are some girls in that group. Soccer tends to be the one that's mixed. So we don't normally have to break it down to gender, but we do have statistical data on the number of users in each of the youth sports groups. As far as informal recreation, that's really hard to put a number on.
Right.
For us, we just don't really have a way of quantifying how many folks are going out there in the parks and playing pickup soccer out in
Right.
Community Park South, or basketball over at Rover Park or something. There's really very little way, or using the playgrounds. That's hard for us to really put a number on. We know anecdotally when we drive by and see a lot of people who are using it, but we just don't have a number to put on that.
If you're collecting the data from the sports teams, maybe a question about, boys versus girls,
Okay.
I'd be interested
Yeah.
to see that and, make sure that we're being as equitable as possible in how things are being allocated.
Sure.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Ben.
Good job, Ben. You're welcome to stay, but you don't have to stay either. Gary, you're next.
Yeah. I don't know if this got to them because they got too late. So I got packets.
They have everything.
Oh, they got the packet too? Oh, cool. Well, thank you for having me here today. Overall, as you know, Corner House is overseen by the Corner House Board. And we have two other community groups that we work very closely with, the Corner House Foundation, which raises the funds for the operations of the Corner House. And then the Princeton Alcohol and Drug Alliance, which is our community arm looking at educational and prevention activities in the community. Some of the major things we're responsible for is to maintain compliance with all the state regulations regarding having a licensed alcohol and drug treatment center for outpatient and intensive outpatient programs, and maintain education compliance for our licensed staff. We regularly assess and coordinate with all of the schools in Princeton their needs and what other issues they're seeing. I think that's one of the things that Corner House prided itself on over the last 47 years. We've been very community responsive. Our outreach programs maintained in the 2000s when we started having gang issue here, and that was pretty much eliminated in response to the programming that we were able to implement. We have extensive prevention programs and outreach programs that cover students from 6th through 12th grade, so we're able to follow students right through. Our leadership programs, we've really focused in the last 3 years, we really had to help students with not only building their strengths, but helping reduce anxiety and depression. So in all of our leadership programs, we really had to add a component each night into helping students with that, because as you know, that's become a significant issue for students in Princeton. So we dedicate a portion of that every year to the evening program. Overall, through those programs, we have about 250 students come through Corner House on a weekly basis. About 95% of them Princeton residents. We have about 10 students who come through private schools who don't live in Princeton, but go to Princeton school. And we also provide internal employee assistance programming to all municipal employees. Our 2019 goals, we can say are almost all achieved. There's two that we're still working on. One, November 25th, we're doing a vaping conference with the health department and the police department. And thanks to Jeff, got some great speakers. And so that's one of the goals that we have. And we have also been able to add that we are now Horizon Blue Cross Blue Shield provider. So people with insurance, which is a major issue for us, we're able to get on that now. We provide training to students about 19,000 hours per year. We provide about 1,500 hours, 1,500 students a year in our alternative activity programs, and we do now accept Medicaid too, which has really increased our effectiveness. We are working diligently and just hired someone through the foundation to work on our social media campaign. That's the area that we find we get more savvy in. So we hired a career manager to help us with that. And we had all staff, one of our goals was to, because trauma is a significant issue that we're seeing through most of the people who come through. So we have 3 of our staff now trained through a private grant in EMDR, which is the state-of-the-art kind of gold standard for treating trauma. And so we have 3 staff people currently trained in that. And the last goal was to secure funding for bilingual therapists. And we have a shared service agreement now with Mercer County for the next 2 years. Renewal after the first year, as you saw at the council meeting, for $65,000 a year. So that was a major effort this year in negotiating with Mayor Gates and Andy Garaki to secure that funding. So we're hoping that we will have a bilingual counselor in place by January. That's our goal, at least. We've seen a definite increase coming through the courts and through the community, the need for more bilingual services. The last 3 months, we're having to, shift people away because we just don't have the resources in town. And they're coming to the courts, the schools, and so I think we'll be able to have a 28-hour-a-week bilingual counseling next year. So we're pleased and excited about that. Other focuses for 2020 is going to be continue our leadership programs and try to expand some of the support services to those members of those programs. And we've got additional funding to Mercer County for the Princeton Alcohol and Drug Alliance. So our grant went from about $28,000 to $56,000, $54,000. So we've seen an increase in funding in 2 areas now for Mercer County, and I know that's always a council's priority. We are also going to implement family therapy training. That's another major issue coming through. We're going to work with the Princeton Family Institute next year to train our staff specifically in family therapy work. And that is it. Our foundation will continue its fundraising efforts. Our budget is covered by private, county, and state funds 50%, and a little more than 50%, and the municipality provides the other 50%. So we're a pretty good bang for your buck, and unique services. We're the only we're the only service in town that provides services to all levels of youth, 6th through 12th grade, from at-risk youth to the most to kids at all other levels, right? So we provide services to all kids, and probably most diverse group of students that come to our house. Any questions?
Any questions for Ted?
I have a couple questions. So you said 6th through 12th grade? So what are resources for families that have kids in elementary school who are, need counseling or?
Well, we can only provide currently substance abuse counseling by a state licensor. They're looking at changing that license requirement for next year, so we will be able to have a dual license, and we will be able to provide mental health license for mental health services. Currently in town, I think Trinity Counseling is probably the best bet. There's a lot of private practitioners in town that we refer to, but we do. All our prevention programs start in 2nd grade, so we're going into the elementary schools, 2nd, 5th, and 7th grades. So students are getting some of our services.
And the other question, not to be focused on the topic of dogs, but I know from talking to other people that many programs have like therapy dogs or therapy, and I'm wondering if you do that, would there be restrictions to doing that given that you're in a municipal building? Because I know that there are people available out there who would like to provide, not that I have names, but like to provide this service. And
we don't have therapy dogs. We actually explored that many years ago. I think if we get the dual license, it would probably be something that we would take more look at, because I think it would lend itself to that population more. That's what we're working with younger kids to do. The therapy dogs are incredible. As far as
therapy chickens.
as public building having the therapy dogs, I would have to ask Jeff if that's an issue.
We've had complaints about it from people that have allergies in the offices, but if they're hypoallergenic dogs, they're good. So maybe we can focus on those, but if we had an isolated area of the office, we wouldn't have an issue with that.
Yeah, Mr. Cohen?
I'm sorry if you addressed this and I spaced out for a minute, but in terms of the opioid crisis, it's a two-pronged question. One is, whether we've seen similar upticks in our community that we're seeing nationwide in that type of abuse. And number two is, are there new funding sources that are available? Because I know that there's a lot of bipartisan support for trying to help with that on the federal level. And, are there opportunities that we're pursuing or not pursuing?
We're always looking at all the funding sources. Princeton, is not immune to the opioid crisis, and we do have the opioid crisis here. It's alive and well, and we're seeing it in mostly the 18 to 35-year-old population who are coming through our doors. It's gotten complicated the last 2 years with the introduction of fentanyl, because so much of what's out there is a combination of heroin and fentanyl, and so that makes it more significant. Our staff is all trained in Narcan in case we have some situations. We did have an overdose in the parking lot in his Uber car on his way in last year. But as far as funding, we're always working with county and state level to secure funding. A lot of the federal grants coming down are through, you have to work through the state and the county. It sounds like there's a lot. And there's also a misnomer that there's a ton of money coming down. What they've really done is they've switched all the funding into Medicaid. And so it looks like there's a lot of money coming down, but it all has to be, people have to become Medicaid eligible. We're allowed to make them Medicaid eligible right on site in Cornerhouse if they meet the criteria. So we're maximizing that, and if you look at our numbers, our Medicaid income has more than quadrupled in the last 16 months.
I just have a question more on the policy side. So as council is putting together our goals for 2020, the answer might be not at this time, but are there sort of policy issues that should be on council's radar that are needed to help support your work, either with vaping or other things that, I know there was an issue at one point with kids who were having a party and
Right.
who
Well,
were having
I'll say a couple things. One, our staff turnover rate is high, and it's high because our salaries are so far off the market range. So people come to Cornerhouse, we give them great training, we get them up to speed in 3 years. They love working for us, but they can leave, walk out the door, make $20,000 more, $15,000 to $20,000 more. So that's a significant issue. So we become like a training factory. We're known to have the best training program in the state of New Jersey as far as clinical training. So we are a preferred internship site for records. So I think that's probably our biggest issue, is that you train staff, you invest a lot of money and time. We've got people certified now in EMDR and family therapy next year. And so they can take those credentials that we're paying for and take them out on the open market, and we lose that that investment in people. So I think that's a big issue. That's probably our largest issue. As far as policy, I think we have secured funding for bilingual. I think that's a huge area for Princeton. We have a 28-hour position funded next year. My guess is, as that work gets out into the community, the need is greatly going to exceed those 28 hours. But because we did have a full-time bilingual therapist for 25 years, and she was always busy, and we're seeing that continue to increase. So, and I also think some of the things that we have done in the past, and looking at youth forums community-wide, and reducing some of the anxiety among kids and the pressure in this community in any way we can, I think is important. Because this is, as everyone knows, a highly stressed youth community. Kids, and when the kids are telling you that, you know, we have to pay attention. We do the best we can with the resources we have.
I mean, I guess it's, I don't know if this is crossing a firewall, but I'm curious how you work on that with the schools, because that seems like a much more direct relationship, and I know that the board members currently put a high priority on trying to reduce the stress.
We work very closely with people on a daily basis. I mean, I talk to Jessica on a regular basis, and Jason Burr, looking at what programs where Jason and I just met, he's the vice principal of middle school, doing some programs in the spring with some of our outreach staff with some of the kids in the middle school, where I have some flexibility with staff and we can go in and actually, with our prevention and outreach staff, to go in and do some programming. We do have a program in the middle school for girls in 6th, 7th, and 8th grades that really addresses all of those issues. You know, we'd like to get similar programs for boys. It's just finding the money because I can't provide that service just for free. You guys want, you know, kind of money has to get reimbursement for that too. So.
First of all, thanks for all your work in the community. I smiled when you talked about the training ground thing. I've been involved with a group in Trenton called Anchor House for 30 years, and they face the similar issue of providing great training and then losing staff to better paying opportunities. So I understand that, usually to the state. I'm trying to get a sense of this 250 student per week number. Are there 250 students in counseling and prevention, or do those include your board?
No, those include the students in our prevention and leadership program, 6th through 12th grade.
Okay.
So the prevention programs we have in the middle school, we have a tutoring mentoring program called Academic Success Today. We have a girls discussion group called STARS, Teens Acting Responsibly. And in high school we have Advocacy for Youth program, we have Princeton Youth Project, we have the World of Work for Youth, plus all of our 3 leadership programs, Project Gaia, TAG, and Student Board.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
So my question was somewhat related to what David asked. I know earlier this year the school district, I don't know if it was just at the high school, perhaps the middle school as well, I imagine. Sorry, regarding vaping, that not that it was ever allowed, but they actually, the policy states that anyone caught vaping, instead of detention or suspension, they would be required to attend counseling. And I was wondering if that's something that the school is funded through the school district, or is Corner House providing that?
Yeah, the families have to provide that themselves, so we're one of the resources the schools refer to, but the school does not pay for that counseling. The schools are sent outside of, for money. It's similar to their tobacco policy. So if someone is caught with vaping, they meet with the in-house substance abuse counselor, Michelle, first. And if she determines they need outside counseling, we're one of the places that they would recommend people to. So the school makes multiple recommendations, so they're not on the hook for the spending the dollars to pay for that counseling.
And that's why I had asked, because if there was something that the school had funding for, whether this could be an opportunity for shared services rather than it being just
Yeah, they're always looking to us to see if they can get more funds from us to provide services for them, because they see the municipality has a bigger pocketbook than they do, and so we're always working together to see how we can together work on providing the best level of services for the school. But I don't have the resources or the budget to subsidize their budget.
Yeah, no, and my question was if it's the school district is implementing this policy where it's a requirement.
It is a requirement.
And I would think that for those who can't afford to pay for those services, they should be providing that.
far as I know, the policy is they give 3 referrals, and then it's up to the family to provide
Okay,
services.
then perhaps it's a discussion with the school district. We need
Only
to have with the
discussion
school
with them.
district.
Because
Yes,
we can no longer offer in a corner house for many years, up until the last 2 years. We prided ourselves in not being able to turn anybody away, but when funding changed 2 years ago, we can't offer that anymore.
right, because earlier you mentioned having to turn folks away, and when you do that, I was wondering what other resources are for them, and especially if they
Very
can't afford.
limited in this area. So,
So,
I'm sorry, if I may just interject a little bit in there. For those who can't afford services, generally speaking, would they be eligible for Medicaid services?
yeah, Medicaid,
Right.
state funding, and county funding. So there's 3 other levels of services that we can try to get them eligible for, and we do. So if they can get on our state grant, we can get them on our county grant, or we can get them in the Medicaid. So hopefully, it takes that population who has no funding source very, very small.
But I suspect none of those funding sources are doing vaping cessation funding, right?
Yeah.
Not yet.
yeah, because I imagine especially those.
We're
where-
working with a couple people on vaping issues right now. I mean, it's at an addictive level. Addiction is an addiction, so we can deal with that. We don't have a vaping specific program.
Yeah, because I can imagine even if it's, for example, vaping, if it's nicotine addiction, that they're going to be handing out Nicorette things. So I was just wondering how that was going to work. But also the other question was, you mentioned.
I just want to, when we have the vaping forum, the 2 experts from the state of New Jersey, one is an attorney and one is a doctor, they will be well equipped to answer that specific question.
Okay.
So hopefully we'll see you there.
So our families should come out.
Yeah, that's why
Right.
I encourage all families to come out.
Absolutely.
And the other question, you mentioned that there's a high turnover rate, I don't know how often, but I would hope that whenever there is an opportunity to hire, that you are looking for bilingual therapists.
I'll be honest with you, we always are. Our salaries are too low for bilingual. Bilingual therapists are commanding $60,000 starting salaries in this area. And as you know, our starting salary is $42,000. So I do, but corner house is not at the top of their chart. They command a salary of $60,000.
Well, I would hope, especially
So,
now,
but
I
for
know
our-
you receive.
For this grant, we're going to be offering a salary of $40 per hour for 28 hours, which is the market range, which is the first time we've been able to do that because of this shared service agreement.
So when there are, with this grant, for example, if you were hiring, would it supplement the salary that's already being paid by Corner House, or?
So this is a totally limited, grant-funded shared service agreement, so it's 2 years, and then we'll see what happens after that.
This is for this, just for that.
Right,
function,
right.
Yeah, just for that.
Yeah, no, I understood that. No, I was just wondering if it's if you had an opening, whether that grant opportunity could supplement when you're hiring, whether it could perhaps last longer than just the 2 years.
Yeah. I'd have to check. I don't think it would allow us that, I think it has to be specific to this, but I can check on it.
Just as a follow-up, I'm curious, I wasn't quite clear what we voted on this exactly, how the shared service, so, I mean, is the 28 hours Princeton hours, and then there are other hours that are county hours, or?
It's 28 hours for a Mercer County provider, so it's anybody from Mercer County who needs bilingual service can come to Princeton. This is a county grant.
Okay, so the person will be on location here
In,
all the time that they're working,
yes,
and that's 28 hours a week.
28 hours at Corner House.
And in general, like what percentage of the patients that you see are Princeton residents versus from Cranberry or the county? I mean, is it primarily
I would
100%
say,
Princeton except for these specific grants?
for clinical hours, I would say probably it's a 65-35 split. And our prevention programs, it's 95% Princeton, 5% not those 10 kids. But our clinical is about 65-35 because when you accept state and county money, you have to serve everyone. That's part of the agreement. House has accepted state and county dollars since its inception in 1972. So we've always been required to serve everybody. And, when you accept state and county dollars, you got to serve everyone. But it's about a 65-35 split. Now, Princeton residents, if we have a waiting list, they go to the top of the list on priority. So if we have a 3-week waiting list, and the Princeton person calls, someone else has been on the list for 2 weeks, and the Princeton person calls, they'll get in automatically. They'll be pushed right to the top. So.
Here are two
Yeah.
questions. One question is, do you see a demand for other language? I know you just got Spanish, and that's great, and I remember talking to you last year, and I was really happy to see that on the council agenda packet. But do you feel there's a demand for other languages, and if so?
We have not seen that.
Okay. Okay.
And not at this time.
Okay. And the other question is, and I have no idea if this is even an appropriate question, but the census is coming up. I'm surprised Ms. Friday didn't raise this, and this is a population that, we want to be really sure is counted, and I'm wondering if there's any way to make sure that census materials are available, or if it can be worked into some of the programs with youth, that it's really important that everyone be counted and that there are no dangers to it, because, funding that we get and all kinds of things, as you know, will be based on our census
Sure, we
data.
can make those materials available at our front desk there, and we could work with Human Services and with, our bilingual counselor to help people understand that.
Okay. Yeah.
And we will be doing that outreach with all
All departments. I'm just
Yes.
jumping in. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks. All right, can we move on? Affordable housing, all right, thanks, Gary.
Well, I think we all know the number one goal in terms of affordable housing for Princeton is getting a settlement agreement. And so our department will work with council and with our planning consultants, et cetera, to help make that happen. And once a settlement is in sight, we'll continue to work on operational manuals and work as we can to help coordinate affordable housing ordinances that need to be integrated between the township and the borough. So that's kind of on an overall sort of larger scale level. In terms of day-to-day operations, we just continue to offer the programs that we've always had, which is affordability assistance and helping people if they get their mortgages and HOAs, et cetera. So that's ongoing. Something new from last year is I've now been given the green light to start up the housing rehabilitation program. Prior to this year, I was told to pull it off. You shouldn't be going there yet. But I think that was because we always thought we'd have a settlement within a couple months. And as, the time dragged on, it became obvious we should just go for it. So I did an RFP for an inspector, and we did have the bid opening last week, and I did get 2 proposals. So I think we will have a housing inspector on board soon. And at that point, after I have the housing inspector, I can begin marketing the program. I think one of the key populations we should market to are people who are in our affordable housing units, because those units are now 25 years old and they're becoming deteriorated. And I see it all the time when people try to sell their units, because many of them have original heating systems, original air conditioning systems, old water heaters. And when those water heaters go, it affects everybody, from the 3rd floor, everybody gets affected. So I think we really need to work on preventing those kinds of hazards. And that's what I plan to do. But in addition to that, I think in the last year we've seen on my board, we had a subcommittee dealing with they called it obstacles to affordable housing, and it really started out looking at what are obstacles for mixed status families. So that would be maybe family where the parents are not documented, but the children are, or the children are American citizens. And what obstacles are they facing to obtaining affordable housing? Because it could be things like inadequate credit, or, just no down payment that they would have, or they need help with just utility bills and things like that. So there's been in the past year definitely more focus on reaching out particularly to the Hispanic community in town and trying to help them obtain affordable housing, particularly rentals. And we will continue to do that. And one of the goals is to, when we do the housing rehabilitation program, or when we have these new projects coming on board after our settlement, when these new projects are built, to make sure we do some community networking, to get out there and let people in the community know the availability of these programs, bearing in mind we do have to do regional marketing for any new construction projects. It's part of the COA rules, and even though COA doesn't exist, it's still part of the process. So those are our goals have not changed. I think I was here in 2017 saying the same thing, in 2018 saying the same thing, and here we are again. And once we have our settlement agreement, it will be much easier to have concrete goals moving forward. But that is our goal. Our number one goal is getting the settlement.
Any questions from me? Yeah.
So do you ever collaborate with the Habitat for Humanity?
Only in as much as they're building some affordable units in town, but other than that, no.
I ask because I understand that they have a rehabilitation program available that they're just starting to announce.
Yeah, and I don't know the details of that program, but we will also have an in-house affordable housing program because as part of our affordable housing settlement, we do have a housing rehabilitation obligation, and we are supposed to be using some of our development fee funding to fund that housing rehabilitation program.
Well, I'll forward because they asked me to translate the flyer for them.
Oh, okay.
And it's a rehab program it's only for the outside of the home.
Oh, yeah,
And it's
yes,
for the outside.
I've seen that.
But
Now,
you
that's
should know-
something that we could not get COA credit for, because in order to get COA credit, it has to include a major system, which would be like a plumbing, heating, roofing, something like that. Roofing might fall into that category, and you can't leave any code violations on the
Right.
property. So we wouldn't be able to just focus on the exterior. I do remember seeing literature on that, and
Right.
also doing some landscaping stuff.
Right, but it's just something that I thought that, not necessarily partner, but help, it's a resource for some of our families. And then the other one was, when you mentioned the mixed status family, the need to help. There's certain areas that even our affordable housing providers, I don't think that everybody's aware how families that if they don't have a social security number, that they can still build credit using a tax ID number.
Right.
And
that's
not
our-
everyone's aware of that.
Yeah, our subcommittee has been working on that, and it's still in the process. So we are focusing on exactly those kinds of issues and how to overcome those issues, as particularly when these new projects are built, how we're going to be able to allow those kinds of families to get access to the units.
But historically, it's been possible. It's just that not everybody's aware. They just assume, okay, you don't have a social security number, you can't qualify because of that. But actually, with a tax ID number, someone can not only build credit, it can also be used, there's ways to get around for an individual to be able to get, whether it's a criminal background check, that's still possible, even if an individual.
Right, and those are the exact two items that the subcommittee has been looking at. How can you do criminal background checks? How can you do credit checks if someone does not have a social security number?
Right.
what firms are out there, particularly when it comes to credit checks and criminal background checks, who are willing to do those checks and stand behind them. And we're making some progress on it. It's a very complicated issue.
Well, the resources are out there, including, I know through Human Services, we had some resources that have offered to do training and how to access those resources. So it's just something to keep in mind.
I'm just curious, like, how does one get a tax ID number outside of a social security number?
Is by filing taxes. So anyone that is interested, we have many individuals who may not have a social security number, but they still do their taxes every year.
So the
because-
IRS will assign them
Yes.
a tax ID number?
Yes.
Oh,
Could not be easier.
Yeah.
Go
I'm
on.
sorry?
It could not be easier. The IRS is happy to accept taxes from
Yes.
anybody.
Okay.
Just go on the website.
I've done it for businesses, like when I create LLCs, et cetera.
No,
I've
it's
never
for
seen, I didn't know that
individuals.
individuals can
Yes.
just get themselves one also.
And all they have to do is file taxes, but also with the credit check, it's just an extra step of willing to provide fingerprint that may not be required of in general, so.
Are there other questions from Maureen?
I have a policy-related question, just something that's come up in the Affordable Housing Board meetings, and will be a policy issue for the governing body, is a possible hoarding ordinance.
Yes.
Yeah, it can be a very sensitive subject, but something that unfortunately may be necessary. So I don't know if Maureen has,
Just to jump in, and I know staff has been meeting on that issue. I think at this time, we're not necessarily recommending a hoarding ordinance because we have resources that are, it's just going to be a matter of us coordinating those resources to deal with that. Because we do see some challenges in developing a hoarding ordinance. So we're going to try to put together some way to deal with it through the existing codes that we have.
Yeah.
I just have a question about hoarding. I mean, I didn't know, is that because it's a fire hazard?
It would be a fire hazard, it could be sanitary issues impacting the neighboring units. It could be even a self-help issue with wellness checks. It could be a mental health issue.
And we've had all that in the last year. We've
Yeah,
experienced
and that's why, it does take almost everybody sitting at the table to try to figure it out. Even then, there's still roadblocks that an ordinance isn't necessarily the way to solve it, but having a flow chart or having a process in place is probably something we need to figure
Right,
out.
so, we don't want to just react after the fact. And a typical example is we had in Washington Oaks, we had a hoarding situation where the hoarding was so bad that it created a structural problem in the building, and the structural engineer had suggested that the place be cleared out immediately, and we had to hire a hoarding company and pay $7,500 to get the stuff out of there in order to maintain the stability of the building. That was, that was a very difficult situation and an extreme situation.
And I don't want to make it sound like it's just in affordable housing that we may have hoarding
Right,
issues.
yeah.
You know,
It's all over, it's all over.
Exactly,
Oh,
right, this could be
That's,
municipal wide.
and I'll just make a quick comment, that's the only place though where you might be able to gain entry or readily, because it is a unit that might be covered by other things that single family homes are not. And it's likely, and I'm sorry, and it's likely to impact the neighboring units because
Right.
we're close proximity.
Yeah. I just want to change the subject for a second. So often on our council agenda, we'll be buying back units and then selling them. And what's the situation right now? Like, how many units are sort of in the ownership of the town where we're looking for buyers? And
Right, so right now, I think we own about 4 units. One of them will be closing in December. I sold one the other day. We had a closing for 27 Brickhouse Road was just sold. We own 213 Brickhouse Road. I have a buyer for that. It has to go before the Affordable Housing Board. They have to approve the buyer. And you just signed off yesterday on 133, so we'll be selling that one as well. We have another unit at 132 Brickhouse Road, which we own, but we have an agreement with Housing Initiatives Princeton that they rented from us. And we have another unit at 140 Griggs, which is the same. Carol's group rents it from us and rents it to very low income. Usually they're single moms who need a lot of assistance. And so those are the two units that they have there. And I have another unit at 134 Griggs, which is a beautiful unit, but we've just had an enormous amount of trouble selling it because there's no washer dryer in the unit, they're not allowed, and there's no laundry facilities in the building. And so I've shown that unit so many times, but as soon as people find that out, they're not interested. So that's the one I'm having the most difficulty, but the Affordable Housing Board, that's a moderate income unit. What they've suggested is maybe reach out to a lower income population, and they may be happy to have that unit. So that's what I've been doing.
So would you say it's just part of the normal ebb and flow? There's
Absolutely.
not, okay, great. And then a couple other questions I had. So I know like with Avalon Bay, they decided to go with their own marketing company, and I think it was so great the work that was done between your office and the Housing Authority and PCH to have that universal application. But one of the concerns, especially as we move towards the building that's going to be happening under the new affordable housing plan, that for all of the inclusionary developments that are part of that, we're going to have different developers that if they don't use PCH, we're going to have now like even more different entry points. And is there something that, is this on the board's radar, or is there something we can do to make them part of that universal application somehow?
Yeah, I've reached out to the Community Grants and Planning is now handling applications for Avalon Bay. And I've started that discussion with them as to how we can incorporate them into our universal application. So what they've been suggesting is just put a link to them on it, and that link would take it directly to their application, but it is still their application, so it's separate. But I think going forward with the new affordable housing projects, we should get everybody using, if we can, that universal application.
Right, I mean, there might be things, and the other question I had was about sort of defining rent, but it might be helpful to have some sort of policy where, especially as we're going to be bringing a lot of units online, that we can put that in if we end up with developers agreements or we end up with some other sorts of approvals, maybe work with the planning board on this, that it's a requirement that they do their affordable housing this way. And I think some of, like, we don't necessarily know the details of the operations in terms of what we should be asking for with that, but it would be really helpful to get some guidance from either you or from the Affordable Housing Board on what those asks should be. Because once it's built, it's really hard to go back and.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. And I think, and working with other towns, what I see is that each developer needs to provide an operational manual. So it's not just a Princeton manual. Each developer should be providing a manual to us. And I think it's important. I've written them for developers in other towns. And I think it's very important that we have that from them.
Right, but I think it should be a two-way conversation too, so if we can tell them what we want in the manual up front, I think that would be really important.
Just one other thing I wanted to mention, that's not, I didn't see it on the projects and issues for affordable housing, but just the fact that as we consider new affordable housing building, that there's a large emphasis being put on doing net zero building. And of course, we know core rules prevent us from creating any additional undue cost on a new building, but we're seeing studies now that show that you don't necessarily have to generate new costs to get to that same effect. So just wanted to mention that's maybe something that we should include as part of the goals.
Yep. Thank you. Any other questions for me? Jeff?
Okay.
Lindsay?
All right, so I'll kind of cut right to the chase. 2020 major projects and issues. Gary's touched on one, so I'll talk a little bit more about Bacon in a second. But To start off, we've witnessed a major uptick in undocumented immigrants coming to Princeton, so we've had a shortage, somewhat of a shortage in our vaccination of children trying to gain entry into school. As most of you are probably aware, to gain entry into school, you're required to have a set of vaccinations based upon the grade in which you're entering. Princeton is required by state statute to provide preventative health services for infants and preschool children. We've expanded it in recent years to cover children, preschool infants through 18 years of age, so the whole school entry isn't an issue because we know children come into this country at any age. And if they want to enter high school, obviously they need to get the same vaccinations. So in recent years, we've seen a slight uptick in terms of the number of undocumented immigrants attending our Well Baby Clinic, is what the immunization clinic is called, over at Penn Medicine. The clinic traditionally saw graduate students with children from Princeton University who did not have insurance, whose children needed to gain entry into a nursery school or elementary school or middle school, and they had to go to that clinic. Now it's the majority of those patients are now undocumented immigrants. So we were working really closely with Human Services and Melissa and the clinic to try to expand the clinic. The issue that we're running into is that it's at basically maximum capacity from our resources standpoint. And what that means is we subcontract a pediatrician who works the clinic. She's a pediatrician from Capital Health that provides typically 6 to 8 hours a month of one-on-one time with these children. And the clinic provides a space which we also rent out. What I left out there was the vaccine. The vaccine is extremely expensive, and the reason why Penn Medicine is a good site is because they're part of something called the VFC program, which is Vaccines for Children. It's a federally funded and also state-funded program that provides vaccines for children. Yet there are very strict requirements to have a clinic that falls under the VFC program. And there's only 2 other health departments in the county that have a clinic that have the VFC program because of those strict requirements. So it makes sense to kind of partner up with a provider, a healthcare provider that falls into those circumstances. So a goal looking into it, a priority for 2020, is to try to make sure that the students that are coming in that need these vaccines are able to get them. The good scenario is that there are clinics called federally qualified health centers, and in Trenton there's one through the Energy Austin Health Clinic. There's 3 sites. They accept children that are uninsured. It can be an urgent care type issue, it can be a vaccine, it can be a physical, it can be really any type of health issue, they can go there. We always like to try to make Princeton the easy choice because it's for parents. You know, there's a heck of a lot of things going on. It's not always easy to get to Trenton for these things. So when children came into Princeton, we wanted to make it very easy and simple to say, hey, you know, call our clinic, make an appointment and get in there. Part of the problem is right now we're backlogged a few months with patients holding up those slots. We've run into administrative issues at the clinic that we've worked through. Melissa and I meet with their director quarterly to try to work out any type of communication issues with the patients, transportation issues, which they now provide a on-demand taxi. But it's an issue going into 2020 that I foresee we're going to continue to have unless we put a lot of time and effort into it to try to make it a little bit easier. Liliana from the schools has been instrumental in terms of the communications. And Melissa's taken it upon herself in her office to even call patients, I think, 24 hours in advance to try to remind them of the appointments, because if they miss one, they could miss even the next month based upon how bad their backlog. So that's a priority in 2020 that we're trying to focus in on, and hopefully there's a solution either through expansion of hours within the clinic, which we're building into our budget, or even trying to make it easier for, say, a town-funded Uber that can get them over to the Energy Austin Clinic if they don't have means of transportation, because we found that some of these parents and the guardians don't have access to a vehicle. Maybe don't even have friends that have access to a vehicle. So those social determinants of health that we talk about really are hitting home in Princeton, and we're seeing it, particularly through this clinic. The other social determinants of health we're noticing is really even through vaping in terms of addiction. And what we've noticed with vaping goes back probably to 2015, 2016, when the Board of Health started licensing retailers that were selling vape products, because they started to notice a huge explosion of these retailers because of the market increase in terms of what they can profit off of these products. A simple vape cartridge they might sell at Wawa for $30. From what we've heard from manufacturers, it might cost them 30 cents. And so these retailers, there's a lot of investment and there's a lot of money in it for them. So when the Board of Health passed an ordinance to require licensing, which allowed us to provide some type of regulation on these sites, we charged them $1,200 a license. Some of them didn't bat an eye. They didn't faze them whatsoever. We did see a decrease in the number of retailers, however, because some of the smaller retailers decided not to sell. It wasn't in it. There was nothing in it for them. That's what they thought, based upon the volume of product that they were selling. So we went from about 8 or 9 retail products in 2014, 2015. After the ordinance passed, we're at about 4 right now, I believe. So from a vaping capacity, earlier this year, you may have heard of vaping-related illness or deaths. At first, the Department of Health is trying to get a grasp on the situation, and similar to reportable diseases, when somebody has they're diagnosed with a communicable disease, the health department gets notified. The state health department was actually requiring physicians to call the health department reporting these vaping-related illnesses. And like a disease investigation, where we'll do an interview, find out, who they could have exposed, who do they live with, are they exposed, what are the possibilities of that disease leaving that person's social network. They wanted us to do that with vaping as well. Now, our training is not in addiction, it's not in interviewing people on their behavioral habits to that degree, so it was kind of interesting that we were required to do this. Nonetheless, we started doing it based upon an interview questionnaire that the Department of Health provided. That has since switched over to the Poison Center, so now they take those calls from the physicians, but nonetheless, we still obviously have a responsibility to provide education and guidance to places that need it, similar to schools, which we're dealing with their issue. Neighboring towns the health departments are providing some form of enforcement in schools, so if a child is smoking on the property or inside of the building, technically it's against the law, it's a Smoke-Free Air Act violation. And the school, depending on the number of disciplinary actions for that course of action, the health department will get involved and actually summons the child or issue notices of violation. It's the carrot, the stick approach, and I'm not saying it works, but we are there for the school. We notify them that we're there from an enforcement capacity if they'd like us to be, but the education component right now is what we're working on in terms of trying to get that through to the school. Outside of that, some of you were involved last week with our strategic planning update. We had a community stakeholder event where we solicited input on our next 5 years of goals and objectives. So we're looking through the Board of Health's approval, updating our strategic plan for the next 5 years. That'll outline some of our community health improvement plans that are in line with the state health priorities as well as the Greater Mercer Public Health priorities. Those are the main issues we see going into 2020. But as you all know, every year is different. 2014 we had Ebola, 2015 we had enterovirus, 2015, 2016, or 2017 we had Zika, 2018 we had vaping, lead in drinking water, 2019 we had more vaping, so 2020 I couldn't tell you what's going to happen. But I can tell you when those things pop up, they can be quite debilitating in terms of you drop everything and that's on your plate. So those issues are always at bay, and we're always excited to work on them when they come up, but just understand that sometimes that's when things get displaced from a workflow perspective.
Other questions?
Do you keep numbers of how many new families are coming in that require the vaccination?
So thanks to Melissa and her staff, they've actually been tallying, I guess based upon the clinic need, they've been tallying them every month. And I'd like to say they've gone from about 4 or 5 per month, 2014 through about 2016. 2017 and on, they went to about 7 or 8. Now we're probably 10 plus a month,
Yeah.
which doesn't sound like a heck of a lot, but it's a smaller clinic, and these children are coming in a lot with 0 vaccination records. So when they meet with the pediatrician, and they think about when you've been to the doctor, it's typically a 15-minute visit because it might be one issue. We're dealing with 8, 9, 10 issues. They're typically about an hour long, hour and a half long appointments with the pediatrician.
Yeah, That's what I had heard, that the numbers were doubled
Yeah.
in the past. But if, I know we're capturing the children that are going to the school district that are needing these vaccination. How much of the issue is it for adults not to be vaccinated?
So it's a big issue. Right now, adult vaccination immunization rates have actually gone down quite a bit. Again, a lot has to do with immigration and children. You know, what's the one thing that they're required to do if they go to school? Get vaccinated. If you're an adult and you're trying to get a job, your employer doesn't necessarily ask you what your vaccination history is. So what we've done is, and I've spoken to the pediatrician about this a little bit, she actually will have conversations with the parents about vaccinations. However, we need to do a better job of trying to make sure that we can link them with the appropriate clinic. Now, they are able to enter, they can also go to the federally qualified health center. And again, this flu season, we tried to make a strong effort about vaccinating anybody that was underinsured. But from a full capacity of other vaccines that they could be missing, hepatitis A is a big issue if they're a food service worker. That's something we need to do a better job of making sure we're linking them with those necessary health clinics.
And is there a plan in place for that, or is that something you're working on?
That's something we're working on. This afternoon, we actually have a vaccination meeting for children. You'll be there. So that's, I would suggest we bring that up and talk about what we can do to implement those services.
And my other question related to retailers that sell vaping products. I think I understood from the past that it was if someone's found to have been selling, if there's violations of selling to underage, that is the cashier that is penalized. Are we planning anything? Is there anything in place for the establishment itself?
So I'm glad you brought that up. It's a great question. In 2015, the reason that was in the ordinance was because the state law hadn't passed yet. So we had to put it in, and from what I was informed by the attorneys, was that was the only way that we could have it passed. We couldn't put it directly on the facility because of the fact of what the cashier was doing themselves. Now that the state law has passed, there's things in that law that allow us to go and penalize the facility.
Okay.
So we spoke about this in the Board of Health meeting. In October, we have a new ordinance introduced to update the existing e-cigarette licensing ordinance that will put most of the responsibility on the facility. And after, I think it's 3 strikes, they could lose their license altogether and not be able to sell. So it's going to make that a little bit stronger. We understand that the cashier is not always at fault. So we'll do a little bit of investigation in terms of, has this happened with the cashier before? Have they been trained by the employer? Did they know what they did when they did it? Those types of things. But we're going to try to gear it towards the facility altogether.
And that was my follow-up question, that's enforcement. How do you monitor? How are you monitoring that?
In terms of the,
Whether-
are they selling?
Yes.
We'll send in underage, typically college interns, to go and try to purchase with an inspector. And we'll do, they're called TASE checks, tobacco age sale enforcement. So we'll go in and then we'll do just kind of ad hoc pop-ins trying to purchase e-cigarettes, tobacco, what have you. We found that cigarettes are actually easier to get right now than e-cigarettes. When you send in a 19 or 20-year-old college student asking for Marlboro Reds, I would think if I was a cashier, I'd be like, okay, if it's a stronger cigarette, but those for some reason, they have no problem selling. And I'm wondering if it's because the tobacco license through the state's only $50, and the enforcement's a lot more relaxed than e-cigarettes right now. And also, going back to the ordinance, we're increasing the fee to $1,500 because we noticed from the time and effort that goes into some of these checks, it covers most of the staff time.
A follow-up question, it may not be health department related, maybe public safety, but sale of alcohol, does it monitored by public safety police? Okay, so that means my question for the
Thank you for the examination of the fueling station reports that were forwarded by the neighbors. It was very helpful, the Public Works Committee. And this is sort of a related question. I think we all see clickbaity headlines that say find out what 5 carcinogens are in Princeton's drinking water, or, and they're based on sort of state reports, and I forwarded one from Patch to Councilwoman Niedergang and to you. If I could make a suggestion that, and your answer to me was pretty solid, which was yes, and here are the levels, here are the acceptable levels. If we could get out ahead of that messaging somehow by having those answers sort of readily available, so they're just like cut and paste as a comment to one of these things or out ahead of the reports. I think that people see these things, they get scared, they click on it, which is the intention to sell advertising, and they don't have the access that Councilwoman Niedergang or I have to immediate answers.
Yeah, and
so using Access Princeton is a suggestion.
No, and I appreciate those comments, because we noticed this last year with the lead in drinking water at the school. And although the school didn't have anything that exceeded EPA lead drinking water standards of 15 parts per billion, they did have 6-7 parts per billion in some of their facilities. Most had older faucets that still had lead components. The question from parents that echoes in this area is, well, why is there any lead in it? And I go back to, no, you're right, we should get that as low to 0 as possible. The 15 is set based upon risk science and how many people are impacted by those levels drinking it on a regular basis. But as we know with a lot of things, especially with science and public health, those levels continuously get lower and lower and lower to try to get them as close to 0 as possible. So I think that report, I actually took it as a positive. I said, it's great that people are out there trying to make these levels lower, getting people aware of what they're drinking. My question, or my answer to residents always is, have you tested your own tap water in your house? How old are your pipes? Have you, do you know if there's lead solder on the pipes? Because more often than not, the response back is, no, I haven't had it tested. So, well, you should probably have your own drinking water tested, because it might be different than even what's coming in through this report. And from there, then we can come up with even a filtration plan, because a lot of people think that their filter on their fridge filters out all of those things. Some do, and some don't. And some people don't change them, and some people don't have them. So it's a conversation, you're right, in terms of being from an educational component. I agree with totally.
Just a follow-up on that, do we link to New Jersey American? I assume it's all.
The municipality posts the drinking water reports. That being said, I think, I've been hearing what you're saying in terms of, getting out in front of it. A little more due diligence in terms of reviewing it and seeing what elevated levels are there, even if they're not above EPA threshold, is good advice in terms of education for residents.
Yeah, and I think some, for example, there's just arsenic in the soil and it gets in, you can't really do anything about it except move, as I understand it. So, it's just a little, some explanation.
Yeah, and we
those
see it again. We talk about lead so much. There's a lot of other metals that we should be worried about. But a precaution we tell parents is if they have lead in the drip line around their home and it was formerly painted with lead-based paint, is an appropriate interim control or prevention tactic is actually put mulch down. And people say, well, that's not permanent. It's not permanent, but if you continuously put mulch down, the child's not able to grab that soil and eat it, which they do. And that's acceptable and that's state law. So there are things that even, we can do a better job of educating the public about, for sure.
Thank you so much.
Cool.
Melissa?
So with the upcoming census, we'll be working to strengthen our outreach efforts to vulnerable communities, and we'll be working closely with the council subcommittee, along with various community partners, departments, and the municipality. We'll also be working to develop a Welcome to Princeton package, and this was actually created a couple years ago, but it has not been updated. And it was only created in Spanish, so we do want to get it out in a couple languages. And we are thinking of working with the Princeton Public Schools PTO, because they are also interested in creating a Welcome to Princeton Schools package for families. So that'll be a combination of resources for the schools and also community resources. And then we will be increasing efforts to improve workers' rights in Princeton, specifically in regards to wage theft and also for worker safety. So we'll be working with the Rutgers OTech to bring those trainings to restaurant workers here in Princeton. And then continuing to advance welcoming policies and training opportunities that we will be bringing to Princeton in collaboration with Welcoming America, and then hopefully continuing those training opportunities throughout the year. And then finally, continuing to administer our departmental programs and services. Any questions?
I want to just ask about the Welcome to Princeton packet. So is that concentrated on sort of social service resources? Because it's something that council's been talking about too, I think more comprehensively about, registering to vote and when your leaves get picked up and sort of like parking and overnight parking restrictions. But yes, and even just like the tree ordinance and all of those things.
Ideally, it would include those.
Okay.
The current Welcome to Princeton packet that we have does include all of those items. We have a separate resource guide that is for specific community resources. So ideally, we'd like to combine both of them.
Okay, great. Well, it might be something when we're developing our council priorities that I think almost all of the boards or commissions might have things that they want to add to that too. And to make sure we reach out to the realtors too, because we find that sometimes people get sold a house that doesn't match really where they want to live.
Right.
So.
Or do they plan on taking down all the trees?
Right, yeah, like if you don't
They buy.
like trees, don't buy a house in the forest, or if you have 20 cars, don't buy a house that doesn't have a driveway, that sort of thing. That it would help to have some of that basic information in there. Okay, are there any other
So
questions?
it's not so much a question, but more of a comment. I know we've discussed whenever human services or others do the training, whether it's worker rights or know your rights, that we should also start including their responsibilities.
Right.
And just one good example, I know in public safety we've discussed certain incidents that could be just perhaps cultural differences that may be okay in our home country, but it's not okay here. So it's something that we should be, we can be sensitive about it, but it should still definitely be helpful if we can include it in this training.
Right, and that's actually one of our immigration subcommittee and outreach subcommittee priorities and goals moving forward is having those short little video clips or trainings on the cultural differences.
So I do have a question. I'm not sure it really falls directly in your wheelhouse, but an issue that has been a concern is that, for example, recently, and Leticia helped us out with this, Shade Tree developed a little guide to mulching your trees, and Leticia, somebody translated it to Spanish and wanted a second check on that. But I'm sure that there are, and this is really a administration-wide question, that there are many documents that need to be translated into other languages, and I'm wondering if it makes sense to develop some kind of, volunteer corps of people who would be available to, I'll translate this document into, Mandarin or Cantonese, or I'll translate this document into Spanish. We're having a volunteer fair coming up next weekend, and there are people in the community who have this expertise, and instead of like each individual group scrambling around going, oh wow, I need to do this or that. So I don't know if it's too late to kind of set that up, but
It's never too late.
never too late. It's
a great idea.
10 days before, so because I don't know if that is if a lot of those requests come to you.
Yeah, primarily
Okay.
Spanish. So we do a lot of Spanish translations and interpretations for the department and community partners as well.
Okay. And then do you feel like your resources are, you have that under control or it's
No.
extreme?
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah,
don't
so
have the
let's
resources
develop
there.
a cadre of
Yeah.
translators.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. You guys all do a really great job, so
Yeah,
really
thank you all.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
And I'm interested offline too about just like feedback for this meeting too, because the goal is to just increase the communication and working together, and sometimes having a more sort of informal setting helps with just talking about some
I'll just say
issues
that
that are
if
there.
this was available, I know it's probably.
Oh, ahead of
tight.
time?
Yeah, ahead of time, I'm not that good at acquiring a massive amount of information really quickly, and
Yeah.
even a couple of days would be, because I did actually check the notice, and, there was nothing there other than,
Okay.
so, yeah, if that's possible. that would
Can
be
I make a
super
PSA?
helpful.
Oh, sorry, Yes, I don't know if you're all aware that the Civil Rights Commission has organized a civil rights training primer that is going to be offered, presented by the Attorney General's Division on Civil Rights, and it's open to all municipal employees. And the list is already registered, but it's open to everyone, and if you don't already have the link to the registration, I'll be happy to send it out. But it's on Friday, November 8th, 10:30 a.m.
And how long is it for?
It's 1.5 hours.
Thank you. All right, so, yeah, it's good.
I just have a general comment, which is that since this is supposed to be a sort of budget priority meeting, I feel like everybody's been dancing around the issues of the budget impacts of their programs rather than directly addressing.
The issue is we're so early in the budget process, and I know we've been calling it a budget preview meeting, but we haven't even put together the full budget to even have some of the conversations I know people want to have. We started this process really early. We usually will get into those details. If you look at the budget calendar, once we have all of that put together, this also helps us in kind of putting together the budget details.
So we'll have
Sure.
another,
I'm not looking for numbers, but I do think that, for Evan to say, we really would love to have one additional staff person, that's going to be how our program for this year is going to impact our budget request or something straightforward like that. So that, we understand. It's wonderful to know what you guys are all working on, but also important for us to start thinking about budget priorities.
Listen, I just want to remind people about the vaping workshop with parents on November 25th from 7 to 9 at Princeton High School. It's a collaboration with Princeton Health, Princeton Police Department, Corner House, PADA, and all 4 high schools in Princeton are all collaborating to put this together. So it should be well attended, and we ask the council to continue to get the word out there for it.
Does that get taped and put online?
It's going to be on tape, TV30 will be putting it. The last vaping one we did, it has been picked up by 15 stations throughout the state of New Jersey. So we're hoping that this one gets the same kind of traction.
Any last comments? All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
Second.
That was, moved by Ms. Niedergang and seconded by Mr. Kreml. All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everybody.